The body unconscious without the thinker. This is a great discovery, for it means that the body without the thinker could neither be sick nor suffer. For without the thinker there could be no movement of the body. Why then are we sick? This inquiry will not be answered until every form of disease is swept from the face of the earth and numbered with the things that were once thought necessary. For man has discovered that the body of itself has no life nor power to act. Let us follow the course of man's thoughts since he first made this discovery about the body and began to apply his knowledge. He first realized that instinctive man built up the body through evolution, and after having created and evolved a perfect body, left it in man's keeping to do with it as he willed. At first, man was ignorant of this, thinking that the body was self-operating, but as soon as he discovered that such was not the case, he began to formulate certain new theories about himself. He discovered that while he could consciously think and decide, something happened to his thoughts after he had thought them. They went somewhere, for soon they would come back as remembrance. Man had now discovered that he could consciously think and that his thought would come back to him again. This led to the conclusion that memory is an active thing, an inner mental action. He said, "Memory is the storehouse of all my conscious thoughts and it is active. My body is not conscious of life, but my thought is conscious of my body. My body is operated upon by my thought, and it must also be operated upon by my memory, since memory is active. But since memory is only the result of conscious thought, memory of itself is an unconscious operation of what was once a conscious thought." The conscious and the unconscious thought. Since man has always had the habit of naming things, he named his memory his unconscious thought, and his conscious thought he called his objective mind. He now came to the conclusion that he had two minds, one conscious and one unconscious, or subconscious. The conscious mind being the one he used all of the time in his self-conscious state, and the subconscious mind being the storehouse of all of his conscious thoughts, as well as the seat of his memory. It follows that, as conscious thought acts, unconscious thought must also operate. This conclusion led to the discovery that the subconscious mind is the builder of the body, not that it really made the body in the first place, for instinctive man did that, but that the subconscious mind keeps the body going and is always acting on the thoughts of the conscious mind. After carefully watching this process, man discovered that he could consciously think, and by doing so, made such an impression on his unconscious thought that it would do what he directed. From these observations, he deduced the law of suggestion to be one of action and reaction. Thus, he found how habits are formed, that they are conscious ideas fallen into the inner thought and carried out to logical conclusions. A new basis of thought. Therefore, he began to reason. Instinctive man within me is perfect, and yet I appear to be imperfect. My apparent imperfection must be the result of an imperfect thinking. In reality I am, and have always been, perfect. I will now begin to think differently about myself and see what happens. And as he began to think from this new basis, he found that the body responded and was healed. So he came to this conclusion: God made me perfect, but he also made me an individual, which means that I can do with myself as I will. I cannot really destroy my body, but I can make it most uncomfortable. Since God made me and made me perfect. Each one of the organs of my body represents a perfect idea. Realizing this to be true, he began to think from this basis, and the organs of the body responded. He found that thoughts of peace produced a peaceful condition, while thoughts of fear produced a disturbed condition. That confidence made him strong, while fear made him weak. In fact, he was able to trace each mental attitude to its physical correspondent. He discovered that, asleep or awake, the inner mind works all the time. He also found that by analyzing his thought, he could discover what ailed him. This he called psychoanalysis. The law of the mind. Then another idea came to him. The whole thing was in accordance with the law. He had discovered a law of mind, just as he, at another time, discovered a law of electricity. If it were law, then he could always use it and it would always respond. From this he gradually built up a definite technique for the practice of right thinking. He found that if he always thought of himself as perfect, he would always feel better. But what should he do with his body when it appeared sick? How was he to think of himself when he was sick? Could he deny that he was sick when he was suffering? Yes, for his sickness was the result of thought, and by changing the thought, he could change the effect. He learned to turn away from the body when it was sick, and go back into mind and think of the body as being perfect. For his thought worked independently of the body. He turned from the image of sickness to the idea of health, and said, I am perfect no matter what the appearance may be. Unconscious mind at work. But some kinds of sickness had never entered into his mind at all. He had never consciously thought of them. How was he to reconcile this fact with his new theory? For a while, this was a hard problem to solve. But by a still more careful study of his inner self, he discovered that what he called his subjective mind took all of his thoughts and did something with them. He found that there were certain combinations of thought which, brought to their logical conclusions, would produce certain kinds of diseases. He did not have to consciously think of a certain disease to have it, but if he thought certain kinds of thoughts, they would produce their logical results. For instance, if he were excited all the time, it would produce nervousness. If he became angry, it would secrete poison into his system, and so on, for the whole category of all human ailments. Somewhere in mind, they had their reason for being. Perhaps he could not always tell exactly where, but by knowing that his body was perfect, he could still heal himself. He knew that as his time went on and his knowledge grew, he would find out more and more about himself, and so be better able to heal himself. He was glad that he had started on the right track. He believed that he would know all in time and never be sick again. Another great discovery. Thought reached others. Then a new discovery came, which was that he could think of others and heal them. It seemed to make no difference where they were. He could think of them and heal them. This was a most astounding fact, for it meant that there was a common mind somewhere through which his thought operated, for he could not reach another unless there was a medium between himself and the other person. This seemed strange, for what he had learned to think of as his individual subjective mind was, after all, only the personal use that he was making of something which was around everyone. He began to think for others and found that mind responded to his thinking for them and caused some action to take place in their bodies. He called this medium universal mind, or the law of God. It seemed to be as omnipresent as the law of electricity or any other forces of nature. The discovery of race thought. In this way, he discovered how it was possible that the whole race might have held certain kinds of thoughts, and how they might have operated through anyone who was receptive to them. That is, if anyone should feel discouraged, other thoughts of discouragement might gain entrance also and make him feel worse. This he called race suggestion. But how was he to protect himself from it? By knowing that it could not operate through him, that he was a perfect idea and could not be affected by suggestion, for, after all, it was nothing but thought. He learned to build a mental wall around himself which could not be entered unless he chose. This he called divine protection, a universal medium which all must come to believe in. Man had now discovered that he could help and heal himself and others by thinking into some kind of a universal law of mind. He found that, like all other forces of nature, it was a great impersonal law and could be consciously used whenever he wished to use it, and that the use of it was through right thinking. He realized that the time must come when the race would be healed by knowing the truth about itself, but because the law was mental, it could only work for those who believed in it. And since many did not believe, the thing to do was to heal himself and others who wished to be healed, waiting for the rest of the world to realize the fact. Another question comes up: why are people poor? But another thought came to him. If he could think into some kind of a universal medium of mind, and heal himself and others, if this mind could produce such a physical effect on the body, why could it not also produce the same kind of effect on conditions and the affairs of life? Why was it that some were rich and some were poor? Was this fate, or was it because there was not enough for all? If the one mind made bodies, why did it also not create conditions? And if it did, why did it not give to all alike? Why were some people happy and prosperous, and others unhappy, weak, and poor? Could the answer to this also be in mind? Could it also be that just as man had thought of himself as sick, and so made sickness, he had thought of poverty and made this condition possible in his experience? Questions like these and many others came into the mind of man and caused him to search even more deeply into the nature of things. Looking about, he saw some succeed and some fail, though all was taking place in the same world under the same conditions. So he knew that it must be something in man and not outside of him that made all of these things possible. He realized that conditions did not make themselves. Everything in man's life was run by man himself. Man begins to realize that his conditions are controlled by thought. In this way, man realized that even his affairs were being controlled by thought working through the avenue of the one mind. He discovered that by changing his thought, he could remold his affairs, and that by right thinking he could bring into his life new conditions. But would there be enough to go around should everyone become prosperous? Yes, for instinctive life is limitless. Realize that he must think correctly. So man discovered that he could control his affairs by right thinking. He could bring into his experience the things he wished to enjoy if he thought correctly. And since this was all in accordance with law, he could do so consciously. He realized that the time would come when everyone would think correctly, and poverty, unhappiness, and all that goes with them would be swept from the face of the earth. They were never intended to be, but man had misused his power. Now that he understood, he could change his whole manner of thinking, and consequently he would become happy and have plenty. But everyone did not believe this. Many said that it was a foolish idea, while others said that it was too good to be true. However, it was soon proven that whoever would believe and comply with the law could prove it to be true. If some did not wish to believe, that was all right. There were plenty who would, and the direct proofs of their lives would in time convince others. In this way, eventually, all would be saved from unbearable conditions. The thing to do was to teach the law to those who did believe. And so the lessons which follow are for this purpose, to teach those who believe in the law how to use it. The race is made up of individuals, and the place to begin is with the person who believes in the greater possibility. Each one, for himself, must work out the law of his own being. It is within the power of every man to completely change his environment and completely heal his body. Whether or not he will do this depends entirely upon his own conviction and his own determination. Nature attends him on the way and is always ready to serve, but he is an individual and nothing will ever be forced upon him. Let anyone follow the law, comply with its nature, and consistently apply himself to right thinking and living, and he will prove to himself that life holds all and more than he has ever imagined.